Hey fabricators, and welcome back to another Advancing Fabric brought to you by Advancing Analytics, your data and AI experts. And I'm joined once again today by my co-fabricator, Johnny.
Hey fabricators.
Hey, so if you're new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. And this month we have another news roundup for you. So we had a little bit of a break in January, so we're back at it now. We've got a whole bunch of updates in our latest news roundup that has dropped just last week. So Johnny and I have had a little look through it. We've picked out our most favorite ones, and we're going to just run through them with you, but definitely check it out. We'll get the link to that full news roundup in the notes at the bottom of the video.
In the description.
So you want to take us away, Johnny, with your first one on your list?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first pick for me is visual calculations in Power BI. So Visual Calcs has had loads of hype around it. If people know Jay from the Power BI product team, he's been on like a visual calculations roadshow almost. So he's been doing the conference circuit, and he's demonstrated this a lot of the conferences, and there's been tons and tons of excitement about it. And it is here. It is available in preview in Power BI Desktop. What even is it? So visual calculations is a way of doing calculations in your visuals. So for once, Microsoft have managed to get the naming convention down pretty well, which is good. So looking at this is the idea that as opposed to writing a DAX calculation at a semantic model layer, you can write it specific to the data contained in a visual. So if you get into advanced DAX concepts like your different contexts and your filter contexts and your row contexts and things like that, you can kind of simplify it by kind of not having to worry about that in the context of a whole model. Just do it in the context of a single visual. So probably the best thing to do is actually show you it. So I'm going to jump on to
nice.
Power BI. Oh yeah, we are all things, all go. Blue Peter, one I made earlier. So I am connected to a semantic model. So this is just a what we call a thin report connected to an already published semantic model up in the Fabric service, and I'm showing some sales data by date, pretty simple stuff. And I want to, for argument's sake, not actually show my sales by day, but my sales cumulatively, so some kind of running total. And historically, to write a running total in DAX, if you could just tell everybody how to do that, Craig.
I don't have the syntax handy this time.
No. Oh, right. Okay. So, historically, it is something that is a little bit complicated. You've got to get into the realms of using calculate and filter modifiers, and basically finding a way for it to ignore the filter context so that it can show sort of the cumulative total for the specific set of data that you've got. Visual calculations makes this loads easier. So you basically select the calculation that you need.
Mm-hmm.
Or sorry, the table that you need even. And the new calculation button up here highlights. There we go. So we've got the new calculation button here. Click onto that. So just to make sure I'm showing that off. So that's your new calculation button. And when you press on that, you will get taken to this little pane in the bottom left, which kind of sort of shows just a summary of your data, but also allows you to create a calculation on top of just the data in your visual. So it's not the whole model, just the data in the visual. You've got this handy little template button. So I'm sort of saying I want to do a running total instead of a sort of day-by-day total. So I've got this nice little running something here. I can throw into that the name of my measure. So that's the measure that I'm using. And click commit on that, and all of a sudden I've got a running sum total alongside my daily sales. If I zoom out of that there, you can see a bit of a preview for it. What's quite nice as well is, even though sort of sales is a measure that's inside of my semantic model, whereas my running sum is a visual calculation, if I don't want to show them side by side, I can actually hide the semantic model calculation, so I just get that running total as well. So loads of excitement around this particular feature. It, for me, lowers the barrier for people who are using Power BI to do those sort of more advanced calculations. It means that people who might have struggled with DAX in the past, it's just going to help them to be able to get up and running quicker, and sort of provides an easier syntax and an easier way of doing stuff. So that's my number one pick from the February news. How about you? What is your number one?
Yeah, so I was having a look through it, and there was a couple. There wasn't a great deal there. There was some interesting stuff around KQL database enhancements and changes. But one of the things that kind of piqued my interest was the mention of domains in OneLake. So if we just switch over to that one. So this one here that's been added in, it talks about domains in OneLake, and I'm like, well, domains were already there, but what it's actually telling you is it's giving us a bit more information. It's giving us a bit more flexibility around domains. So we've got the ability to add in subdomains still in public preview, and actually start to add a bit more structure. So the whole point of this domains component, and I talked about this when we were at Fabric February at the beginning of the month, is around that data mesh architecture. So the structure of domains wraps around your workspaces and allows an administrator to basically control those workspaces. And these subdomains just start to build out that structure a bit more, where you could have like a higher level sales domain, and potentially you could have regional sales subdomains, which then had workspaces for individual teams within that sales team, for example. So you've got the ability to go in and add in new subdomains, name them. We can move workspaces in and out of the subdomains. And as you said before, in Blue Peter fashion, I wanted to actually try this out and play with it myself rather than just looking at the documentation. So you do need to jump into the admin portal for that from in here. And then we've got domains in here. And there's some domains that I've defined already in here. If I jump into my sales domain, I've got that option to add in my subdomains. So I've got these workspaces in here already, where I was actually using the workspaces as that regional split, but maybe I could just do UK sales as an actual full subdomain.
Cool.
And that creates that subdomain in there.
Oh, brilliant. So I was going to say, I think any way that it can help you to like put more structure and organization in your workspaces can only really be a good thing. Yeah,
exactly. And that's something that I was quite excited about, and it kind of builds in that structure. It's not so much like an obvious feature. It's not so much something that is giving you a lot of functionality in the background, but it's certainly given us that structure and capability. So what's next on your list?
So my second pick is Timle. What is Timle? It's not a person. It's not Timle. Timle, tabular model definition language. So
it's another acronym, Johnny. It's another acronym.
Yeah, you love a good acronym. So Timle was actually announced at SQLBits last year, so last March. It was at the time a really exciting announcement. It's kind of seen as a really good kind of milestone in that developer experience for Power BI.
Yeah.
Historically, if you were to take a PBIX file and you were to unzip it, you'd have a load of components in that zip file, and one of those would be a .bim file. So that BIM stands for Business Intelligence Model, and that would hold the definition of your tabular model in it. And that used a language called Timle, just to give you another acronym. So that was tabular modeling or tabular model scripting language. And it was JSON, and definitely in terms of the way it was compiled inside Power BI, it was really, really, really unreadable because it wasn't like nicely formatted or anything like that. Last year we had, I'm going to give you another acronym, Craig, PBIP or PBIP, as I like to call it. Some people hate the fact to call it PBIP. PBIP, which is the Power BI project mode, which allows you to actually, as a developer, rather than work with a PBIX file, use the PBIP format, which breaks everything into those component parts. And ultimately, the definition of the model is now going to transition to using Timle as opposed to using Timle. Now, this all sounds like silly words, and why should you even care? Timle is effectively a it's called model definition language, but I really wanted to. I was almost expecting to stand for Markdown language because it's sort of YAML based, as it were. So it basically becomes loads more readable. So just to give you an example of what Timle looks like, if you can imagine, Timsol was lots of horribly nested JSON that was horribly, horribly formatted and almost impossible to read. This now gives you a format that's actually pretty human readable. So if you're stuck looking at something like that, you get things like obviously your semantic model compatibility level, things like culture settings, the definitions of a table and in terms of which columns and measures that table might have, even things like the M query that sits below the table. And this is all relatively easy to read. Now, where that becomes particularly important is for things like Git integration in Fabric, because if you're doing diffs and merges in your Git project, you're doing like a pull request or you're going through that sort of change management life cycle and you're wanting to check what's been changed. The fact that this gives you a human readable format is going to make it so much easier to understand when somebody's made a change to a model, what it is they've done, and being able to sort of examine those changes in that way.
There was a lot of elements of that in the past. I remember before we had that source control within Fabric for Power BI, there was a lot of elements of that where it was like the JSON would be generated differently every single time, and a lot of the elements inside that PBIX file or the zip file for it, and it just made source control near impossible, basically. So it's great that we're kind of moving towards a lot more standardization, a lot more kind of structure that's going to support that sort of developer process.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that this is coming natively to Power BI Desktop as well. So I'm a huge tabular editor fanboy. I rave on about how much I love tabular editor all the time. One of the reasons for that is the fact that tabular editor used to let you use something they called serialized source control, which let you spit out your model objects into a set of JSON objects. This is getting much closer to that experience. So tabular editor itself does actually also support Timle, but being able to have Timle as well in these these PBIP formats is going to be really useful and potentially opens up loads of opportunity in terms of being able to do developing in a more sort of programmatic manner, being able to sort of potentially start interacting with things like Visual Studio Code or things like tabular editor in terms of editing these properties and managing your semantic model and doing your development via those instead. So
exciting stuff.
Yeah, we're glad to finally see it come to Power BI Desktop because it's been in the pipeline for pretty much a year now. So yeah, pretty good. So what you got next?
Brilliant. Yeah, so next on my list, not a big one like that, is from a data engineering perspective. So if I bring it up, is code snippets within your notebooks. So essentially, like, there's a lot of kind of day-to-day work that I do that's around kind of building metadata-driven frameworks or using a metadata-driven framework for kind of building out the lakehouse. And that's a lot of the stuff we've been kind of doing in the background within Fabric as well. And that's like the reusability of functions and things like that, and kind of making code reuse a priority so that we're supporting developers and we're kind of making things more consistent as well. So this element of code snippets is quite interesting, and it allows you to kind of basically say, well, I'm working in my notebook, but here's a snippet of code that we use as an organization that we can lean on and we can draw down, and we can make sure we're using this in a very consistent way across all of our notebooks. But interestingly enough, if I switch over to a notebook that I've got ready, so we've got a kind of notebook here where I'm processing data into the Silver layer using Spark, and coming up to this edit tab, I can browse those code snippets, and it's got some in there already. So it's talking about best practice. It's got performant data copy, run multiple notebooks in parallel, and you can actually, there's some additional ones in there. some for logging and things like that. And just having those resources in there, I can see this being something that starts to lean into the Copilot element of it as well. Which we could start to see, where we can actually generate those, put them in there, where Copilot might start to actually add into that list as well. And we can restrict it by different languages as well. So that's quite good start. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how much people would use that.
I was just about to say that back in the day, I just used to have like a text file that I kept on my desktop. And when I had like pieces of reusable code I always needed, then I would just reference my own little self-maintained text file. And so, like, obviously we've moved on from that to an extent anyway. Like I've always been using things like knowledge bases and wikis and Git and stuff like that, sharing it. But to bake that experience even more into it, sounds pretty cool. And also the fact it's pre-populated is awesome for people like me whose Python and Spark is like rubbish. So if they are pretty common reusable stuff, then hopefully again that feels kind of lowering the barrier to people like me that don't really know how to data engineer.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the goal as well, is lowering that barrier, kind of bringing in those code snippets. It also gives your organization that ability to go, right, well, let's start to kind of push out some best practices in this area. And I want to jump on to my last one and kind of cut you off with the back and forth because it's related to Copilot again. So the other one, or the last one that I wanted to look at, and unfortunately I could not get the demo working. There's a few caveats there which I'll mention, but it's the ability to have Copilot inside your data flows Gen 2. So we've seen Copilot everywhere. We're obviously going to start to see Copilot cropping up in every element of Fabric and every other element of every Microsoft product, which is great. There's a lot of places where it helps you out, and it does a great job of helping you out as well. I don't use data flows all that much, but in testing this out, kind of working with data flows, it's a nice, easy way to transform your data on the fly, to do some of that ETL process in a nice kind of easy way where you're not having to write notebooks, you're not having to kind of know that Python, that Spark kind of knowledge. So working with them is already kind of helping simplify that, is lowering that barrier of entry. But now the integration of Copilot into that gives you the ability to say, hey, look at this field now. Let's actually take this field and split this surname and first name out. You don't need to worry about what the kind of syntax would be. Copilot's going to go away and do that for you. As I said, I could not get a demo of this to work, unfortunately. There's a few caveats with anything Copilot related, that you're going to have that F64 capacity attached to your workspace, F64 or above, to be able to use Copilot initially. I couldn't get it working. It's still in preview at the moment. It's something that you should definitely look into and try out.
Just as long as you switched off the F64 capacity after you'd finished trying to get your demo working, Craig.
Yes.
Yes. I mean,
definitely did that.
It feels like there's like a slight theme with this month's release. It feels like there's lots of sort of quality of life and sort of barrier lowering features that have gone in there. So it's almost kind of, we've got all these new features and concepts from a Fabric perspective. So especially for people coming from a Microsoft type background, because I guess some of these concepts are relatively familiar to us coming from sort of Databricks land, but there might be a little more unfamiliar from people coming from other backgrounds. But there's all these kind of little things that can help you out to make life easier and make it easier to get up and running and going. Looks pretty cool. So it's interesting that you segued there and you were like, I'm going to cut you off there, Johnny, because the next thing I want to talk about is related, because it's about Copilot. Well, my very next thing was already about Copilot.
Oh.
So, I know, but Copilot's everywhere. It's going to be inevitable, isn't it? So, my final highlight is this idea of creating measure descriptions with Copilot. So, recently, again, talking Databricks again, Databricks put into Unity Catalog this ability to use AI to generate descriptions for your data. and this is almost like a similar feature coming into Power BI for your measures. So, like, absolute best practice from a Power BI modeling perspective is to include that extra metadata with your models. Make sure you're filling out all your descriptions and giving context. For things like AI,
in an ideal world.
yeah, 100% in an ideal world, but it is always a pain. So, like, definitely 100% when like using things like best practice analyzer and tabular editor, you've not filled out these descriptions is normally one of the main things that gets forgotten about. So now you can just get AI to do it. So I think last year David from Tabular Editor actually wrote a script that would call ChatGPT to do this for you, and that needed some C# and it needed an API key for ChatGPT.
Yeah.
This is now just all baked in via Copilot, so you can basically get it to auto fill out that description for you. Obviously, it gives you the opportunity, because it's not necessarily going to get it right every time. It's always going to have that disclaimer that this is AI generated and you're going to want to have to vet it.
Yeah.
But it kind of seems to bake that into the experience as well. You've got a try again button if you need to, or keep it if you have to as well. And there's always the option there as generate something, and it might be 90% right, so you just edit the last 10% as well. So again, quality of life, being able to automate things, get things done quicker. That's another really cool one. So yeah,
brilliant.
Overall thoughts on February release then?
Yeah, like as you say, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is lots of kind of quality of life improvements, some nice kind of feature additions and things there. Nothing kind of blowing the socks off us, but yeah, there's definitely a lot there, and it's quite good to start to get back into it and see that news kind of flowing out again. And there's some new things kind of floating around the background, which we'll hopefully put together some additional shorts for, if we don't get that round up together, or see them rounded up in the March news update as well. So awesome. Lots of interesting stuff. I'm looking forward to the point where we open up the news and there's only one or two things. It seems to be like a good 20-30 points each month, Johnny. It's quite good.
Yeah, loads of stuff still to come as well. Like you say, we'll make sure we get the link to the actual release notes into the description. So we've kind of decided to pick out our highlights this month, but there's still many other items in there that you can check out, and just expect more and more to come each month as well. So yeah, there we go.
Brilliant. So that's all we've got for you today. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.